You don't hate yourself because you're broken. You hate yourself because you've been taught to see your wounds as evidence of who you are. Because every time you stumbled, someone whispered it was your nature. And now, even in silence, that voice doesn't leave you. It's the quiet war, the kind that doesn't explode, it corrodes. You wake up already exhausted. You move through the day with a face you don't recognize. And every night, a cold echo returns. Why am I still like this? It's not that you haven't tried. You've tried discipline, you've tried punishment, you've tried silence, you've tried vanishing, but nothing changes because you're not trying to change. You're trying to erase a version of yourself that still remembers the pain. And that version, it doesn't go quietly. It waits beneath your rituals, beneath your achievements, beneath your guilt. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But no one taught you that. They taught you that darkness is shame, that failure means you deserve less, that the parts of you that suffered were weaknesses to be corrected. So now when the disgust rises, you think it's justice, you think it's truth, you think it's you, but it's not. It's the echo of survival mechanisms. It's the residue of voices that never saw you, only your behavior. It's the child still trying to understand why love always came with conditions. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." But it's not even pleasure anymore, is it? It's scrolling, it's drinking, it's numbing, it's the temporary forgetting of a permanent ache. And maybe the worst part is knowing what you're doing and still doing it. Watching yourself perform the same cycle again and again, because disgust feels like progress, shame feels like structure, pain feels like effort. But what if that's the trap? What if the part of you hate the most is the one that needs you the most? What if self-disgust isn't a tool, but a prison, not built by you, but inherited, not truth, but trauma, wearing your voice? And now, the real question isn't, how do I change? It's this: what part of me have I condemned that was only ever trying to survive? You learned to hurt yourself before the world could, to say, "I'm disgusting," before anyone else had the chance to think it. As if hating yourself first could protect you from being hated, as if cutting the wound deeper could make it disappear. And maybe it worked, for a while. That feeling of punishment gave you a strange sense of order, a cold discipline, a way to believe you were in control of your chaos, because somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that guilt equals progress, that shame equals growth, that you'd only evolve through pain sharp enough to make you obedient. So now, when you disappoint yourself, you don't ask why, you just punish, you tighten the leash. You hope the next time you break, it finally breaks you into someone new. But it never does. It just loops. The guilt, the self-scolding, the silent collapse behind closed doors. And the hardest truth, you're not doing this because you're evil. You're doing it because it gives you something familiar. You became your own executioner because it made you feel less helpless, because blame is easier than uncertainty, because pain at least is predictable. But control born from shame is never real control. It's just a performance, a ritual to avoid feeling powerless again. You wear it like armor, but it cuts from the inside. It keeps the world at bay, and it keeps your own softness buried even deeper. And all this time, you thought this was strength. You thought this was self-awareness. But it's just fear, wrapped in the language of discipline. It's the voice of survival, pretending to be virtue. You don't need more punishment. You need to ask, without flinching, who taught me that hurting myself was the way to grow? Because until you do, you'll keep mistaking harm for healing and call it responsibility. You don't just feel self-disgust. You've built a life around it. You depend on it the way some people depend on certainty, because that's what it gives you. Not peace, not love, but predictability. You wake up already narrating a story. I'm still failing, I'm still not enough, and even though it hurts, it's a pain you know how to carry, like an old coat, frayed, heavy, but yours. There's a strange safety in that repetition, in wearing the same identity, even when it suffocates you. Because if you drop the story, who will you be without it? This isn't addiction to failure, it's addiction to identity. You're not afraid of losing, you're afraid of no longer recognizing yourself when you stop being the one who always loses. You've worn your self-hatred like armor. It's protected you from hope, from vulnerability, from disappointment. But that armor became a cage. And now, you can't tell where defense ends and self-destruction begins. The voice inside tells you this is just who you are. But that's not a fact. It's a wound repeating itself. And here's the quiet tragedy. You don't resist healing because you want to suffer. You resist healing because it threatens to undo everything you've used to survive. What happens if you no longer hate yourself? What will anchor you then? What will hold your story together if not the belief that you are unworthy? This isn't weakness, it's grief. Because letting go of self-disgust isn't just letting go of pain. It's letting go of the only self you've ever known, and that's terrifying. But somewhere beneath that fear is something waiting. Not a better version of you, just a quieter one. One that doesn't need to prove its worth by surviving its own hatred. You've convinced yourself that if you just hate yourself enough, you'll finally change. That the sharper the pain, the stronger the transformation. That if you bleed enough guilt, some new self will rise from the mess. But it never works, because self-hate doesn't cleanse, it stains. It buries the part of you that needs care and calls it discipline. You think you're burning off your weakness, but you're only deepening the fracture, not because you're broken, but because you've mistaken punishment for purification. There's a cruel logic in it. You fall short, so you punish. You punish, so you feel small. You feel small, so you fall short again. And every loop convinces you that this pain is necessary, but it's not. It's just familiar. And the familiar feels true, even when it's killing you. Carl Jung didn't say we become whole by destroying our shadows. He said we become whole by integrating them, by seeing the parts we fear and choosing to understand them, not exile them. Your shadow isn't the enemy. It's the history of everything you weren't allowed to feel, the truths you swallowed, the cries you silenced, the rage you turned inward because there was no safer direction. So every time you look in the mirror and say, "I hate who I am," what you're really saying is, "I still haven't made peace with the parts of me no one ever wanted." And here's the truth no one told you. You can't build a new self on the ashes of self-hatred, because what grows from ashes is still grief. You don't need to become someone else. You need to stop waging war on the one who survived. That voice, the one that tells you you're a failure, disgusting, useless, it sounds like your own, but it isn't. It's a ghost, an echo of someone else's disappointment, wearing your tone. A punishment rehearsed so many times it became instinct. You weren't born doubting yourself. You learned to. You learned to flinch at your own reflection. You learned that love was conditional. That praise came only after performance. That silence meant you'd done something wrong. So now, every time things go quiet, the voice returns, not to help, but to remind you that safety was always a transaction. And here's the unbearable part. This inner critic was rewarded. It helped you survive. It made you compliant, careful, controlled. It helped you avoid rejection by rejecting yourself first. But that doesn't make it true. It makes it practiced. And the more you listen, the more you mistake that violence for conscience. This isn't just a thought pattern. It's emotional memory. It's the child still trying to be good enough, still trying to earn peace by being small, invisible, perfect. But you're not that child anymore. And the voice, that cold, relentless whisper, is not a sign of who you are. It's a scar with a mouth. It speaks not to guide you, but to keep you from becoming someone it was never prepared to love. And yet, you believed it. because it spoke with the authority of someone who once had power over you. But that power is past. And the voice, it only lives because you haven't questioned its origin. You don't need to fight it, just see it, because once you recognize it's not yours, it loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because you finally stop mistaking it for truth. Even when things are going well, something feels off, like you're trespassing in your own life, like you've stolen a moment of peace you didn't earn. You smile, but underneath the question lingers, do I even deserve this? That's not self-awareness, it's emotional addiction, not to happiness, but to guilt. Because guilt is the last piece of the story that made you. For so long, pain was your proof of goodness. You didn't just endure suffering, you made it sacred. You tied your morality to self-neglect. And now, you don't trust peace because it feels like betrayal. Betrayal of who you were. Betrayal of how hard it was. Betrayal of everyone who never got out. So instead, you sabotage. Not because you're lazy, but because success feels foreign, because rest feels dangerous, because every step forward feels like abandoning the version of you that carried the pain. You carry guilt like it's an heirloom, passed down, polished, protected, not because it's beautiful, but because it's all you've known. And deep down, you fear that if you let it go, there'll be nothing left of who you were. That healing will erase the story. That peace will make you forget the cost. But healing doesn't erase, it remembers differently. It says, you don't owe your past a lifetime of suffering. You can honor the pain without rebuilding it every day. You can carry the memory without letting it dictate your worth. Because guilt is not loyalty, and you are allowed to outgrow the wound, even if it means becoming someone your old self wouldn't recognize. Even if it means forgiving yourself for surviving. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. This isn't just disgust, it's grief, but no one ever gave you permission to mourn the things you lost while surviving. You grieve the time you can't get back, the days wasted in numbness, the promises you broke to yourself, the parts of you that were silenced before they could speak. But grief unspoken turns inward. It becomes sharp, it becomes blame, it becomes that voice whispering, you should have done more, you should have known better. You look at your past like a crime scene, searching for the moment it all collapsed. And then you put yourself on trial, judge, jury, executioner, all in the quiet of your own mind. But what you're punishing isn't weakness, it's survival. It's the you who did what they could with what they had, and you hate that version not because they failed, but because they had to endure what no one should. There's a child in you still buried beneath the expectations, still waiting for someone to say, you shouldn't have had to go through that. But no one said it, so now you carry the grief like guilt. You call it failure. You call it shame. You mistake your scars for signs of defect, not evidence of what you lived through. And maybe that's why healing feels so far away, because before you can forgive yourself, you have to let yourself grieve. Grieve the years spent in fear. Grieve the innocence lost in silence. Grieve the versions of you who were never held, only hidden. You punish the survivor because you never buried the child, but the child was never to blame. And the survivor is still waiting to be met with something other than disgust. Still waiting to be seen, not as a problem, but as proof that you made it through. You've been chasing healing like it's a destination, a final version of you. Clean, whole, untouched by the mess. You read the books, do the practices, watch the videos, try the mantras, and still you feel like you're faking it. Because the truth is brutal. You're not healing to love yourself, you're healing to become lovable. Each breakthrough is measured by how well you can hide the cracks. Each insight becomes another performance, another mask, more refined, more enlightened, more acceptable. But real healing doesn't ask you to shine, it asks you to stay. Stay with what's unresolved. Stay with what's not pretty. Stay with the parts you'd rather amputate. The ego is clever. It turns even self-repair into self-rejection, turns growth into another performance, turns transformation into branding. You don't want to be whole. You want to be redeemed. You want someone to say, now you're finally enough. But wholeness isn't about redemption. It's about integration. It's about facing the version of you that isn't performing, the one curled up in shame, the one who doesn't post victories, the one who's still grieving, still afraid, still unsure. That version doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be heard. You're not broken. You're just exhausted from chasing worth in disguise, from turning every scar into proof of progress, from making healing another way to say, please love me now. But the real you, the one behind all the efforts, all the masks, all the rituals, that version doesn't want redemption. It wants rest. It wants truth. It wants to be free from the pressure to become someone else just to be seen. There comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you stop trying to become someone else, when the chase ends, when the performance dies. You don't arrive at happiness, you arrive at silence, a kind you used to fear, a kind where nothing is demanded of you, not even change. It's not some cinematic transformation. It's sitting with the version of yourself you've spent years trying to outrun, not to fix, not to impress, just to be with. You close your eyes, and there they are, the part you hate the most, tired, bitter, afraid. And for the first time you ask, what are you protecting me from? Not to condemn, not to correct, but to listen. Because beneath every sabotage is a strategy, a desperate attempt to stay safe in a world that once hurt too much. When you finally stop amputating pieces of your story, you begin to realize something radical. You were never weak. You were never lazy. You were never broken. You were adapting. Every flaw you despise was a defense. Every delay, a shield. Every collapse, a form of wisdom. And now that the war inside you is growing quiet, you begin to carry those parts instead of cutting them off. You don't need to become light to be worthy. You don't need to erase your symptoms to be free. Because freedom isn't in fixing what hurts. Freedom is finally recognizing you were never the pain. You were the one carrying it, and you carried it far, far enough to now lay it down, not in victory, but in peace. Self-disgust is not a compass. It doesn't lead anywhere. It just circles back, a wound folding in on itself until the shape becomes familiar. And because it's familiar, you believe it must be true. But truth isn't what hurts the most. Truth is what endures, quietly, patiently, beneath the pain. Carl Jung once said, "The shadow is not evil. It is truth hidden by pain." You've spent so long trying to earn your way back to yourself, as if healing were a debt, as if worth could only come after suffering. But you won't heal by hating your way to wholeness. You won't return to yourself by becoming someone else. And maybe now you see it. The part of you you rejected wasn't the flaw. It was the proof. Proof that you lived. Proof that you survived. Proof that you're still here. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But sometimes the change isn't a becoming, it's an unforgetting. A remembering of the self buried beneath performance, beneath guilt, beneath years of being told you had to earn what was already yours. You are not the rot, you are the root, and even the root in darkness is alive. It grows without light, without applause, without anyone seeing, and so do you. You don't need to be rebuilt, you need to be reclaimed. And yes, you still have time to come home to yourself."